I will marry Dr. Zuri Okafor. She saved my life, Mom.
Before we begin the part 2 of this long-anticipated story, if you have not watched part 1, stop right here. Go back and watch it first. Everything that happens in this story sits on the foundation of what came before. The rain, the surgery, the whisper, the slap, the Busan secret, the winter garden. You need all of that in your chest before you read what happens next. The link to part 1 is in the description below. We will be here when you get back. For everyone who watched part 1 and has been waiting, welcome back. You earned this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs it. And if you cried at the garden scene last time, I'm going to need you to find a comfortable seat, because part 2 does not slow down. Not even once. The cherry blossom tree in the garden was still bare. It was early March in Seoul, and the blossoms had not yet come. Zuri stood at the window of the room she had been given in the park estate. A room that was too large, too quiet, and contained furniture that probably cost more than her first year's fellowship salary. And she looked at the tree in the garden below and thought about the fact that she had, the previous afternoon, told a Korean mafia boss that she might marry him. Might. She was a woman who chose her words with the precision of someone who had spent a decade writing surgical reports. And she had chosen that word deliberately. Might. Not yes. Not no. Not yet. A word with room inside it. The ring box was sitting on the bedside table, where she had placed it before she went to sleep. She had not opened it again. She was not ready for what opening it again would mean. There was a knock at her door. She already knew who it was. Sunhi Park knocked the same way she did everything. Precisely, twice. Neither too soft nor too hard, with the expectation of being opened to. Come in, Zuri said. The older woman entered carrying a tray, tea, 2 cups, and something that looked like jeon, the Korean pancakes that Zuri had developed an embarrassing weakness for in her time in Seoul. Sunhi set the tray on the small table by the window and sat down in one of the chairs without being invited to, which was also exactly like her. You didn't sleep, Sunhi said. I slept. Zuri turned from the window. I just woke early. Sunhi looked at her with the particular eyes that saw everything and commented on less than half of it. She poured tea into both cups. She pushed one across the table. Zuri sat down and took it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, Seoul moved through its early morning with complete indifference to the complicated things happening in this room. My son, Sunhi said finally, did not sleep either. I know, Zuri said. His cardiac recovery still affects his sleep cycle. I told him this would happen for another 3 to 4 weeks. He ignores medical advice like it's personally offensive to him. The corner of Sunhi's mouth moved. He has always been like that. Another silence. The tea was good. It was always good in this house. I owe you an apology, Sunhi said. Zuri looked at her. Not for what I wanted, Sunhi clarified. I do not apologize for wanting my son to have a life worth living. But for how I moved the pieces without telling either of you what the board looked like. She held Zuri's gaze. That was wrong. Zuri thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. Not to arrive at the answer that made the situation easiest, but at the one that was most true. It was manipulative, she said, and it worked, which is the most annoying part. Sunhi's mouth moved again. This time it was almost a smile. My husband always said I was better at strategy than feeling. He was not wrong. He was a little wrong, Zuri said. A woman with no feeling doesn't spend 2 years tracking down an anonymous clinic girl in Busan because she believes she matters. Sunhi was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the bare cherry blossom tree stood in the garden below, waiting for the season to catch up to what it was preparing to become. My son was 7 years old when the doctors first found the defect, she said. It was not a change of subject. It was context she was finally offering. They told me he might not reach 40. They told me his life would require managing, concealing, protecting from the things other men's hearts could simply survive. She looked at her teacup. I have spent 31 years managing that, building walls around it, keeping it hidden so that no one with bad intentions could use it against him. She looked up, and then he was shot, and everything I had built to protect him was not enough. And the person who saved his life was a woman from Lagos who had never heard of him. who had no stake in whether he lived or died, and who stayed. Her voice was steady. I did not manufacture the connection between you. I found it. And I refuse to let the distance between 2 cities and 30 years of my son's closed heart keep it from being known. Zuri sat with that. I understand, she said finally. I don't fully forgive the method yet, but I understand. Sunhi nodded once. That is enough, she said. For now. The moment sat between them, fragile and real. 2 women on opposite sides of everything. Age, culture, world, finding slowly and with considerable friction the edges of something that might, over time, become understanding. Then Sunhi's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, the way ordinary people's expressions change. Just the faintest shift in the set of her jaw, the slight recalibration behind her eyes. The shift of a woman receiving bad news and immediately beginning to calculate the response to it. Excuse me, she said. She left the room. Zuri heard the low murmur of her voice in the corridor. Korean too fast and too quiet to follow. And she sat with her tea and watched the bare cherry blossom tree and felt, in the specific way she had learned to feel danger over the past 3 weeks, that something had just changed. She was right. She just didn't know yet how completely. Subscribe right now if you're not already, because what is about to happen is going to test everything Zuri and Jae-hyun just found in that garden. His name was director Shin Woo-jin. He was 53 years old, and the head of the Shin Syndicate, the largest of the 3 rival factions that had been watching the park organization since Jae-hyun's shooting. He was a man who collected leverage the way other men collected art, methodically, patiently, with an eye for what would be worth the most at exactly the right moment. He had built his operation over 2 decades by identifying the weaknesses of more powerful men and waiting, sometimes for years, for the precise moment to apply pressure. And he had watched Jae-hyun's shooting with the careful attention of a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. The bullet had not killed Jae-hyun. But Shin had calculated that the aftermath might accomplish what the bullet had not. If the recovery was slow enough, if the organization was distracted enough, if doubt could be seated in the right places at the right time. He had watched the foreign doctor arrive at the private hospital, and he had watched the engagement announcement with interest, and then with dawning understanding. Jae-hyun was not weakened. He was consolidating. The woman was not a distraction. She was being built into the architecture, which meant she was the pressure point. He had 3 things in his possession that morning that he intended to use. The first was a series of photographs, taken over the past 2 weeks by people he had positioned near the park estate. The photographs showed Jae-hyun, recovering, moving carefully, still obviously limited by the healing surgery. They showed exactly what Shin had suspected, that the park boss was not yet back to full strength, that there was a window. Windows in this business had a habit of closing faster than expected. He intended to use this one before it did. The second was a file, and it had been assembled by a contact inside the Korean medical establishment, a man who resented the anonymous foreign doctor who had outperformed every Korean specialist on the case and received the credit that should, in his view, have stayed within the system. The file contained Dr. Zuri Okafor's research fellowship details, her hospital access credentials, her daily routine, and the name of the hospital where she maintained her research consultancy appointment. Everything a person needed if they wanted to apply pressure to a target who was not inside fortified walls every hour of the day. The third was a woman. She had arrived in Seoul the previous night on a flight from Tokyo, and she was currently sitting across from Shin in a private dining room in a restaurant in Itaewon that was closed to the public for the morning. She was Korean, 35 years old, with a composed and practiced beauty and the particular stillness of someone who had spent years learning to be exactly what the room needed her to be. She had learned this as a survival skill. Not everyone who is still is at peace. Some stillness is armor. Her name was Han Minji, and 5 years ago she had been engaged to Jae-hyun Park. She had not left him freely. And this was the truth that Shin either did not know or did not care about, and Minji had made a decision in the taxi from the airport that she was not going to correct him on it yet. A rival faction 5 years ago, smaller and since dismantled, had located her family's textile business and made very clear what would happen to it if she did not remove herself from Jae-hyun's life. She had been 29, in love and terrified, and she had made the choice that seemed like the only one available. So she had walked away without explanation and had spent 5 years believing Jae-hyun hated her for it and knowing she had no right to defend herself to him because she had accepted a deal at his expense. Now, here was another powerful man, using her family's safety as leverage again, and the particular cruelty of the repetition was not lost on her. "You understand what I'm asking you to do," Shin said. "I understand," she said. Her voice was level. And she had a glass of water in front of her and she had not touched it. "And you're willing?" She looked at him across the table. There was something in her eyes that was difficult to read. Not fear, not reluctance. Something older and more complicated than either. The look of a woman who has been a piece in other people's games for a long time and is doing the quiet calculation of when and how to stop being one. "He loved me once," she said. "I know how to talk to him." "I'm not asking you to talk to him," Shin said. "I'm asking you to create doubt, to make the woman question what she's walked into, to make the organization question whether their boss has lost his judgment." He paused. "I'm asking you to create enough chaos inside those walls that when I make my move, there is no unified front to push back against." Minji picked up the glass of water. Set it down again. "And what do I get?" she said. Shin smiled, in the smile of a man who had already calculated the answer. "Safety. Your family's business, left alone, and enough money to start over wherever you choose." She sat with that for a moment. Outside the restaurant, Seoul went about its morning. Buses and delivery motorcycles and students in uniforms and all the ordinary architecture of a city that did not know or care what was being decided in this private room. She thought about her mother, Nar, who ran the textile business and had not slept properly since Shin's people first appeared. She thought about her younger sisters who worked there. She thought about 5 years of running and hiding and trying to build something small and quiet in Tokyo and still never quite feeling safe. She thought briefly about the woman she had been told about. The Nigerian doctor. The surgeon who had saved Jae-hyun when no one else would. And the woman who had apparently slapped a mafia boss and then stayed to dress the wounds of the man who tried to kidnap her. Something about that picture, the shape of it, the texture of it, made Minji feel something she had not expected to feel in this meeting. Curiosity. And beneath that, faintly, something that might have been the early signal of recognition. A woman who refused to be a piece. "When do I start?" she said. Meanwhile, on the other side of Seoul at Incheon International Airport, and a flight from Lagos was landing. On board, Dr. Emmanuel Okafor, age 63, Zuri's father. A general practitioner with a laugh that took up the whole room and opinions about everything that he shared with the confidence of a man who had been right about most things for 6 decades. He had large, careful hands, doctor's hands, and a habit of watching people the way physicians watch patients, looking for what the surface concealed rather than what it displayed. As he had built a small but beloved clinic in their Lagos neighborhood that had served 3 generations of the same families. He was the kind of man that communities anchor themselves around without being asked. Beside him, Dr. Adaiz Okafor, age 60, Zuri's mother, biochemist. The person from whom Zuri had inherited her particular brand of beautiful contained stubbornness. Adaiz had the precision of a woman who had spent 4 decades working with things invisible to the naked eye and had therefore developed a formidable instinct for noticing what everyone else missed. She had also, in 35 years of marriage to Emmanuel, become quietly expert at letting him believe he was leading a conversation while she had already finished it. Behind them, Zuri's younger brother Chidi, 28, currently doing a startup in Lagos Tech, deeply suspicious of anything that sounded too much like a fairy tale and constitutionally incapable of keeping his opinions to himself. He was tall like his father, with his mother's eyes, and he had spent his entire life being fiercely, sometimes exhaustingly, proud of his sister. Pride, in Chidi, expressed itself as protectiveness. Protectiveness in Chidi expressed itself as questions that other people found uncomfortable, but that he considered basic due diligence. They had been told, by Zuri in a phone call 3 days ago that there was someone she wanted them to meet. She had not said he was a mafia boss. She had said he was a businessman. She had said he was Korean. She had said she was happy. And she had said it with a particular quality in her voice that none of them had heard before. Not the happiness of an achievement or a milestone, the way she sounded after a successful surgery or a published paper. Something quieter, something that lived below the surface and was not performing itself for anyone. Her mother had immediately started planning what she was going to wear. Her father had immediately started planning what questions he was going to ask. Her brother had immediately started preparing to be difficult, which was his love language. The flight from Lagos to Seoul was 14 hours. 14 hours in which Emmanuel read 2 medical journals, watched 1 film without finishing it, and spent approximately 3 of the remaining hours thinking about his daughter. Adaize slept 4 hours and spent the rest watching the clouds and thinking thoughts she kept to herself. Chidi wrote notes on his phone under the title, "Questions for this Korean businessman," and when Adaize asked what he was doing, he said, "Preparation," and she said Chidi in the tone that contained his entire childhood, and he put his phone away. Then he waited 20 minutes and took it out again. Mar, the car that met them at arrivals, was black, immaculate, and had a driver who did not speak beyond the initial greeting. Emmanuel Okafor looked at this car, looked at his wife, and said in Igbo, "This is not an ordinary businessman." Adaize said, in Igbo, "Emmanuel, do not start." Chidi said in English, "Dad is right, that car costs more than our house." "Our house," Adaize said mildly, "costs considerably more than you think." "Fine. Yao, it costs more than my apartment." "That is more accurate," she agreed. They drove through Seoul toward the Park Estate, and the city outside the windows was extraordinary and foreign and enormous. The way cities are when you arrive in them and understand, gradually, that they contain entire worlds that have been going on, without your knowledge, for a very long time. The Han River caught the afternoon light. The mountains behind the city were green-gray and permanent. Knowing the streets were organized and fast and filled with a purposeful energy that Emmanuel found, though he would not say this yet, somewhat reminiscent of Lagos beneath all its surface differences. A city that did not stop. A city that moved. None of the 3 of them said anything for a long time, because they were all privately doing the same calculation. Their daughter, their sister, had called them from this city and told them she was happy, and whatever happiness looked like here, they were going to see it for themselves. And if it was real, they would embrace it. And if it was not, Emmanuel Okafor had been practicing the right questions for 14 hours and was prepared to ask every single one. Don't go anywhere. The Lagos family is about to walk through those gates, and nothing will ever be the same. Comment below right now. Are you team let them be happy? Or team the family is about to cause chaos? Tell me. Zuri met them at the entrance of the estate. She had dressed carefully, not formally, not in a way that suggested she was performing a role, but in a way that said, "I am myself, I know where I am, and I am not ashamed of either." Dark burgundy wrap dress, natural hair loose and full, the small gold stud earrings she always wore. Her mother saw her from 30 meters away, and her face did the thing it had always done. The opening, the relief, the love that Adaize Okafor had never once tried to hide. They embraced. Emmanuel wrapped his arms around both of them and said nothing for a moment, which was how you knew something mattered to him. Then Chidi said, looking at the estate behind her, "Zuri, what is this place?" "A home," she said. "Whose home?" "Someone I'd like you to meet." He looked at her with the focused suspicion of a younger brother who had spent 28 years cataloging his sister's decisions. "You are not giving me information," he said. "No, you are giving me the shape of the absence of information." "Yes," she agreed. "Come inside." Jae-hyun was waiting in the main sitting room. He had dressed with care, too, and she noticed it, and knew he had done it for her. And something moved in her chest at that knowledge. Dark navy suit, no tie, collar open just enough that the edge of the collar tattoo was a suggestion rather than a statement. His left arm was in the suit sleeve, the tattoo covered. He had thought about this. Yamon he had decided that meeting her family was not the moment for the full version of himself that included visible markers of a world they had not chosen to enter. He stood when they came in. Emmanuel Okafor looked at this man. 6'1", broad, angular, with the particular stillness of someone who was accustomed to being the most powerful person in every room. And then looked at his daughter. And Zuri was looking at Jae-hyun with an expression Emmanuel had never seen on his daughter's face before. Not soft exactly, but open. The way a door is open, not blown off its hinges, just chosen to be ajar. "Mr. Park," Zuri said, "this is my father, Emmanuel. My mother, Adiez. My brother, Chidi." Jae-hyun bowed. Formal, respectful, the correct depth for greeting elders. He said in careful, practiced English, "Thank you for coming. I know the journey was long, or I am grateful to meet the people who made Zuri who she is." Emmanuel Okafor looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Young man, sit down. We have things to discuss." The next 2 hours were the most singular experience of Jae-hyun Park's adult life. Emmanuel asked questions the way a prosecutor asks questions. Not aggressively, but thoroughly, with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world and intended to use it. What did he do? How did he make his income? And what were his intentions? What did he understand about Zuri's work, her ambitions, her research? What did he think she was giving up by being in his world? What was he prepared to give? Jae-hyun answered every question. Directly, without evasion, without the performance of authority he used in his professional life. He was, Zuri realized, with something that felt like wonder. Genuinely trying. There was no strategy in how he spoke to her father. It was just a man telling the truth, to the people who loved the woman he loved. He did not tell Emmanuel about the organization. He said he ran several private business interests. He said his world was complicated and sometimes dangerous, and he would not pretend otherwise. He said Zuri would never be required to be anything other than exactly who she was. He said her career was not a sacrifice he was willing to accept. That if anything, her independence was the thing he found most extraordinary about her. As Emmanuel listened to all of this, then he looked at his daughter. "You love this man," he said. It was not a question. Zuri held his gaze. "Yes," she said quietly. "I do." Adeze Okafor, who had been watching everything with the eyes of a biochemist, trained to find what the data actually said beneath what it appeared to say, reached across and covered Zuri's hand with hers. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Chidi, Han, who had been sitting with his arms crossed and his jaw set for the entirety of the conversation, looked at Jae-hyun and said, "If you hurt my sister..." "Chidi," Zuri said. "No, let him finish," Jae-hyun said. Chidi looked at him with the full force of younger brother protectiveness. "If you hurt her," he said, "I don't care how big your house is or how many suits you own. I will find a way to make your life difficult." Jae-hyun looked at him. And then, something none of them expected, one corner of his mouth moved upward. "I believe you," he said. Chidi blinked. "I would expect nothing less from her brother," Jae-hyun said. "She did not become who she is without people who fought for her. I'm glad she has you." The silence that followed had a different texture to it. Something had softened. Not resolved, not finished, but shifted in the direction of possible. Outside the sitting room windows, the cherry blossom tree stood bare in the pale afternoon light, and across the city Minji was already moving. She sent a message to a contact inside the Park estate, a junior staff member who had been on Shin's payroll for 6 months, recruited quietly, carefully, the way all the most dangerous things are done. The message was simple: arrange for her to be seen, not to speak to Jae-hyun yet, just to be seen at the right moment, by the right person. That person was Zuri, and it happened the following evening. The Okafor family had been given rooms in the guest wing of the estate, an arrangement that Zuri had negotiated with Sunhi, with the particular directness of a woman who had learned that Sunhi responded best to clarity. And Zuri was walking back from the medical suite where she had checked Jae-hyun's post-operative vitals when she turned a corner in the corridor and stopped. There was a woman standing at the far end of the hall, Korean, Zuri's height, team in a cream coat. She was looking directly at Zuri with the expression of someone who had been placed there and knew it. "Dr. Okafor," the woman said. Zuri did not move. "You know my name. I know a lot about you." She came closer, stopped at a distance that was close enough to be intimate, far enough to be unthreatening. Calculated. My name is Han Minji. I don't think anyone here has mentioned me to you. The name landed. Zuri had heard it exactly once, from Jae-hyun himself, yet on the night he had explained what had happened to his capacity for trust. She had filed it away. She had not expected it to walk up to her in a corridor. They haven't, Zuri said evenly. I was engaged to Jae-hyun, Minji said, 5 years ago. I know who you are. Minji looked at her steadily. Then you should know that what you've walked into is not a love story, she said. It's a transaction. His mother chose you because you were useful. The engagement is a political strategy. Jae-hyun doesn't love, he deploys, I know. I was deployed the same way. Zuri stood very still. I left, Minji continued, because I wanted to survive. I'm here because someone reached out to me who thought you deserved to know the truth before it was too late. She tilted her head. He will never put you first. The organization will always come first. You will spend your life in that hospital suite checking his vitals, and he will spend his life making you feel chosen while the machine around him uses you up. Silence. Zuri looked at her. At the carefully assembled expression, the prepared words, the precisely calibrated sympathy. The doctor in her had spent a decade reading patients, reading bodies, reading faces, reading the difference between what was being performed and what was real. Who sent you? Zuri said, and something flickered in Minji's expression. I came on my own? You didn't, Zuri said. Her voice was quiet and completely certain. You were placed here. That message was scripted. That sympathy is real. I can see that you've had a hard time, and I'm sorry for it. But this conversation was designed by someone else. She paused. I am a doctor. I have spent my career telling the difference between a condition and a symptom. You are a symptom. So I want to know what the condition is. Minji stared at her. The composure she had walked in with cracked, just slightly, just at the edges. What was underneath it was not what Zuri had expected. Not calculation, exhaustion, fear. His name is Shin Woo-jin, Minji said quietly. He said if I did this, my family's business would be left alone. He has been threatening them for 3 months. Zuri was silent for a moment. She looked at this woman, who had come here under duress, who had been a weapon aimed at her by someone else's hand, who was frightened and tired and caught between 2 powerful men's games. Come with me, Zuri said. Where? To find Jae-hyun. She held Minji's gaze, because what you just told me is information he needs, and you need protection, and I think you're done being used as a piece. Minji stared at her for a long time. You're not what I expected, she finally said. People keep saying that, Zuri said. You all walk with me. Like and share this video right now. This is the moment everything explodes at once, and I need you with me for the rest of this. What happened in the next 48 hours happened fast. Jae-hyun's response to Minji's information was not fury. The fury had come and gone in the first 5 minutes. A controlled, cold, focused rage directed entirely at Shin Woo-jin and the machine of intimidation that had been quietly tightening around the people he cared about. So after the fury came the strategy. It was breathtaking to watch. Zuri had seen him be powerful before. She had never seen him be brilliant. He called his senior people together within the hour. He laid out what Minji had given them, the intelligence on Shin's positioning, the knowledge that a staff member inside the estate had been compromised, the timeline of the threats. He did not ask for opinions, and he delivered a plan with the calm precision of someone who had been doing this for 20 years and had never once lost sight of the board. The room was silent while he spoke. Not the silence of people being told what to do. The silence of people who recognized that what was being laid out in front of them was exceptional. Zuri sat in the room for part of it. Not as a participant, she had been clear that this world was his, not hers, and that she was not going to become a player in it. But he had asked her to stay, not for advice, for presence. She had understood, sitting in that room among his people, what her presence communicated to all of them. That he had someone beside him who had seen all of this and chosen to remain. That was its own kind of message. She understood the difference. The compromised staff member was quietly removed before he knew the discovery had been made. Information flowing out of the estate stopped instantly, and Shin would spend precious hours believing he was still receiving intelligence. 3 of Shin's closest associates, men he had positioned in locations around the estate in the belief they were invisible, found themselves the subjects of evidence submissions to a law enforcement contact that Jae-hyun had cultivated carefully for exactly these moments. The evidence was legitimate. It had been assembled over time, held in reserve, waiting for the right occasion. This was the right occasion. Shin's financial operations received 3 simultaneous regulatory inquiries from bodies he had believed were entirely beyond reach. He had thought he was untouchable in that regard. He had been wrong by exactly the margin of Sunhi Park's separate and parallel network, which operated in spaces her son's organization did not cover: the institutional, the governmental, the officially sanctioned corridors of power that ran alongside the unofficial ones. Sunhi, who had been anticipating exactly this kind of move since the night of Jae-hyun's shooting, had spent the intervening weeks quietly activating allies within Shin's own circle, people who owed debts, people who feared the direction his ambitions were taking, people who had been waiting for a reason to withdraw their support. She gave them the reason. By the end of the first day, Shin Woo-jin was looking at a collapsing operation, a rapidly closing set of options, and the dawning understanding that he had not only failed, he had failed against a family that was, collectively, significantly more formidable than he had assessed. He had calculated for Jae-hyun. He had not calculated for Zuri Okafor finding Minji in a corridor, sitting with her, listening to her, and walking her to safety instead of treating her as a threat. He had not calculated for Sunhi's patience. But he had not calculated for Emmanuel Okafor's 14-hour flight and the 3.5 hours he spent over dinner, making certain that his daughter's future was structurally sound. He had calculated for vulnerability. He had found a fortress. At the same time, in the guest wing, a different kind of negotiation was happening. Emmanuel Okafor had found out. Not everything, not the full extent of the organization, not the operational details, but enough. He was a general practitioner who had practiced in Lagos for 30 years, which meant he had seen corruption and power and the way dangerous men operated, and he was not naive about any of it. He had heard things in the corridors of this house that a man of his experience couldn't unhear. He had put the pieces together in the way intelligent people do, not because they go looking, but because they can't stop their minds from organizing what they see. He came to find Zuri, though she was in the medical suite reviewing charts when he knocked. She knew from his face when he entered that this was not going to be an easy conversation. "Sit down, Zuridachi," he said, using the full name that he only used when he was being completely serious. She sat. He sat across from her. "Tell me," he said, "what kind of man I am leaving my daughter with." Zuri looked at her father. This man who had taught her that education was the inheritance that couldn't be taken, who had stayed up with her through every exam and every crisis, who had been in the back of her mind during every difficult surgery as the voice that said, "You know what you're doing, keep going." She told him the truth. Not all of it. There were things that were not hers to share, things that belonged to Jae-hyun's world and his alone. But the shape of it, the kind of power Jae-hyun held, the world it came from, the danger it sometimes carried. She told him about the kidnap attempt, and she told him about Minji being sent to break her. She told him about what she had learned in the Busan file and what it meant. Emmanuel listened without interrupting, which was the thing he did when something mattered enough that he didn't trust himself to speak until it was finished. When she stopped, the room was quiet. "You love him," he said. "I told you that yesterday." "You told me yesterday from happiness," he said. "Now tell me from the full picture." Zuri thought about it seriously, on the way she thought about everything that mattered. She thought about 7 seconds of flatline and what it felt like to fight for someone's life. She thought about a night in Busan when she was 27 and terrified and stayed anyway. She thought about a garden in winter and a man who got on his knee with no armor and no strategy and just asked. "Yes," she said, "from the full picture." Emmanuel was quiet for a long time. "Your mother," he said finally. Fell in love with me during a cholera outbreak. I was running a temporary clinic in a flood area. She was there doing water sample analysis. The conditions were terrible, and I was exhausted and covered in things I will not describe. And she looked at me and said, "You should eat something, doctor. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." She handed me a wrapped piece of bread from her bag. He paused. I knew in that moment. Not because it was romantic, because she saw that I needed something, and she gave it without being asked, without calculation, without needing anything back. Zuri looked at her father. "That is what love is," he said. "The rest is just context." She crossed the room and hugged him, and he held his daughter the way he had been holding her since she was small, like she was both the most precious thing in the world and fully capable of standing on her own without him, both things at once. Behind them, through the window, then Seoul moved through its afternoon. And across the city, Shin Woo-jin was receiving news that his window had closed. He sat in his office and looked at the reports coming in and understood, with the particular clarity of an intelligent man whose plan has failed, that he had underestimated Jaehyun Park. He had thought that a recovering man, a foreign woman, a distracted organization, was a vulnerability. He had not understood that the foreign woman was not a distraction. She was a force multiplier. She had found Minji, extracted the intelligence, handed it to Jae-hyun within the hour, and the entire operation had been dismantled in 48 hours. He made one last move, the move of a desperate man. He sent men to the hospital where Zuri was scheduled for a follow-up consultation with a colleague about the research fellowship she had somehow managed to maintain through everything. 6 men. Not a kidnapping this time. A message. The kind of message that powerful men send when they want to communicate that they can reach anywhere. They found her leaving the building at 5 in the evening, and they found, a half-second later, that they had been expected. Because Jae-hyun was there. Not hidden. Not tactical. Just there. Standing on the hospital steps in his charcoal coat. His left arm at his side, the tattoo sleeve invisible under his sleeve, but the authority of him completely visible in every other way. 6 of his own men materialized from the surrounding positions. The numbers were not in Shin's favor. They had never been in Shin's favor. Jae-hyun had known about this attempt for 4 hours and had let it proceed exactly far enough to be the last one. Shin's men stopped. Jae-hyun looked at them with the particular expression of a man communicating something that does not require words. They left. Zuri had watched all of this from the hospital steps. She had her medical bag. She had her coat. She had the specific expression of a woman who is going to have a full and complete conversation about this later and will not be talked out of it. She walked down the steps to where he was standing. "You knew," she said, "since this morning. And you let me go to the hospital anyway." "You had a professional obligation," he said. "I made sure you were protected." She looked at him for a long moment. "Jae-hyun, we need a rule. All right. No more letting things get to the edge before you tell me. I am not someone you protect by keeping information from. I am someone you protect by trusting with the information." She held his gaze. "Do you understand the difference?" He looked at her. The city moved around them. The evening light was the particular gold of Seoul in early spring. "Yes," he said. "Good." She turned and walked toward the car. He fell into step beside her, one hand coming to rest briefly at the small of her back. Not possessive, not performative. Just there, present. "Also," she said, not looking at him, "my father wants to have dinner with you. Alone. Just the two of them." A pause. "I see," he said. "He told me it's a formality," she said. "I told him nothing about you is simple enough to be called a formality. He said that's fine. He has time." Another pause. "I'm not afraid of your father," Jae-hyun said. "I know," she said. "But you're slightly worried, which is correct, because Emmanuel Okafor is a man who has spent 60 years being right about people, and he is going to look at you over dinner and decide something permanent. And you know it matters to me what he decides." He was quiet. "It matters to me too," he said. She looked at him sideways. And the thing that moved through her in that moment, in the gold evening light of Seoul, With the city around them and everything that was about to change, was not a complicated thing. It was a very simple thing, wearing complicated clothes. Don't go anywhere. We are almost at the moment this whole story has been building toward. Comment below right now. Did you know from the beginning they were meant for each other? The dinner between Emmanuel Okafor and Jae-hyun Park lasted 3.5 hours. Zuri did not know what was said. Neither of them would tell her entirely, which was the most maddening thing that had happened to her in a story that included being almost kidnapped twice. What she knew was that her father emerged from it looking like a man who had conducted a thorough assessment and arrived at a conclusion he was at peace with. And Jae-hyun emerged from it looking like a man who had been examined more completely than he had ever been examined in his life, including the 9-hour cardiac surgery. "Well?" she asked her father, and he looked at her with the eyes she had known her whole life. "He loves you," he said simply, inconveniently and completely, the way the best love always is, "and he is afraid of losing you in a way that makes him try harder, not less." He paused. "I told him that if he ever stops trying, I will know, and I will come back." She laughed, a full, real laugh, the kind that had been increasingly present in her life over the past weeks, and that she was done being surprised by. "What did he say?" she asked. "He said he would expect nothing less from your father," Emmanuel said. "And then he said something about a cherry blossom tree." Zuri stilled. "What about it?" "He said he wants you to see it bloom," Emmanuel said. "He said he's been waiting for the right person to see it with." He looked at his daughter. "I told him that was the right answer." 3 days later, the cherry blossom tree bloomed. It happened overnight, on the way it always does in Seoul. The city goes to sleep in winter and wakes up in spring, and the blossoms do not ask permission. Zuri stood at her window in the early morning and saw it. A cloud of soft pink and white against the pale sky, impossibly delicate, impossibly present after all that bareness. She was still standing there when she heard the door. Jae-hyun came in without knocking, which was new and meant something about what had shifted between them. And he was in dark trousers and a simple black shirt, his left arm visible, the tattoo sleeve in full detail in the morning light. He had a cup of tea. He had brought one for her as well, which she suspected he had learned from watching his mother. He stood beside her at the window. They looked at the tree together. "It's beautiful," she said. "Yes," he said. He was not looking at the tree. She turned to look at him, and he was looking at her with the expression she had first seen in the garden. The open one, the undefended one, the one that had been waiting a very long time for permission to exist. "I want to ask you again," he said, "properly. Not in the garden with my mother watching from the window." She looked at him. "You knew she was watching?" "My mother is always watching," he said. "It is her primary hobby." She laughed again. He reached into his pocket and brought out the ring box. And he did not kneel this time. He stood beside her, equal in height, equal in the morning light, and opened the box and held it between them. "I am not easy," he said. "My life is not simple. My world has edges that cut, and I cannot promise that they will never come close to you, because we have both already seen that they do. What I can promise is that you will always know what I know, that I will never manage you or protect you through silence again, that your work, your name, your independence, these are not things I want to change. They are the reasons I'm standing here." He looked at her directly. "I want to marry you, Zuri Okafor. Not because my mother engineered it, not because of Busan or the garden or the deal, because of every moment since, every argument and every midnight and every morning you looked at a tree, and I watched you look at it and understood that I could not imagine not watching you look at things for the rest of my life." The blossom tree moved slightly in the early morning breeze outside the window. The city was beginning its day below them, unhurried and enormous and indifferent, the way cities always are to the specific things that are everything to the people inside them. Then Zuri looked at the ring. She looked at the man holding it. She thought about Lagos and Johns Hopkins and Busan and a flat line in 7 seconds and a garden in winter and a father's dinner and a mother's private smile, and the particular sensation of loving someone so completely that the world reorganizes itself around the fact of them. She thought about the cherry blossom tree blooming at last. "Yes," she said, "not might. Not yet. not a word with room inside it. Yes, and he put the ring on her finger with hands that were, for the first time she could remember, not entirely steady. She noticed. She kept it to herself. She covered his hand with both of hers until the steadiness returned. From down the hall they could hear the sounds of the Okafor family waking, Emmanuel's deep morning voice, Adaizi's precise response, Chidi complaining about something in the cheerful way of a man who complains because he is comfortable. The sounds of family, and of a life that had followed Zuri across the ocean and arrived eventually in the right place. Sunhi appeared in the doorway. She looked at her son. She looked at Zuri. She looked at the ring. She did not say anything because she did not need to. The thing she had spent years building toward had become real in the way real things always are, quietly, in the morning light, with no announcement and no performance. She went to the kitchen and began making tea for everyone. And because this was a day worth marking, and in Sunhi Park's world, you marked the days that mattered with tea and presents and the quiet conviction that the important things, if you are patient enough and brave enough to hold on, find their way. The wedding happened 6 weeks later, not a large wedding. This surprised everyone who knew the park name and pleased everyone who knew Zuri. She had been clear. She did not want an event. She wanted a ceremony. There is a difference. And an event is for an audience. A ceremony is for the people standing in it. In the weeks between the morning proposal and the wedding day, there had been much to settle. Zuri had negotiated the continuation of her research fellowship with the clarity of someone who had rehearsed the conversation in her head and was not going to be talked out of her conclusion. She would complete her research. She would publish her paper. Her career was not a casualty of love. It was a companion to it. And Jae-hyun had sat in that meeting with her fellowship director and not spoken a single word except when addressed, because he understood that this was entirely her room. She noticed. She told him afterward, in the car, that it was one of the best things he had ever done. He had looked genuinely puzzled. It seemed obvious to him. That was the most telling part. There had also been the matter of Minji. After Jae-hyun dismantled Shin's operation, he had gone to find Minji himself. I'm without Zuri. This was something he said he needed to do alone, and she had understood the shape of why. He found her in the small hotel room where she had been staying, waiting to see how everything had collapsed around her. She had expected anger. She had expected the particular cold fury she had seen in him once before, years ago, directed at someone who had betrayed his trust. Instead, he had sat down across from her and said, quietly, "Tell me the truth about why you left." She told him. On all of it. The threats, the family business, the impossible choice she had been handed at 29. She told him without asking for forgiveness, because she had spent 5 years deciding she was not entitled to ask for it. He was quiet for a long time when she finished. "I spent 2 years believing I had done something to make you go," he said. "I searched myself for what it was. I closed down everything that might be damaged by that search." He looked at her directly. "I would like you to know that learning the truth does not undo those 2 years, but it changes the shape of them." She nodded. "Your family's business," he said. "Give me the details. It will be protected. Not as payment, because nothing that happened to you was a debt you owe me, because it is the right thing to do." She had started to say something. Thank you, perhaps, or I'm sorry, perhaps. And he had stopped her with a small movement of his hand. "One more thing," he said. "You want the woman you met in the corridor. Zuri." He paused. "She went to find you because she wanted to protect you. Not because she saw you as a threat. I need you to know who she is." Minji had looked at him for a long moment. "I already know," she said quietly. "That's why I told her the truth." She left Seoul 2 days later for Tokyo, and Jae-hyun's people ensured that nothing and no one reached her family's business again. It was a small act in the context of everything else, and it was not small to her. The ceremony was held in the garden. The cherry blossom tree was still in bloom. Late in the season, a small miracle, as if it had decided to stay a little longer for the occasion. The petals drifted in the light spring breeze and settled on the stone path and on the shoulders of the people gathered in 2 neat rows of chairs. Jae-hyun's most trusted people on one side, on the Okafor family, and a handful of Zuri's colleagues who had made the flight from various cities, on the other. Sunhi had wanted a guest list of 200. Zuri had said 40. They had settled on 52, which both of them privately considered a victory. Emmanuel Okafor, who had not been asked to walk his daughter down any aisle because Zuri did not walk to anyone. She walked beside, stood at the edge of the gathering with his wife's hand in his, and the expression of a man who had spent 60 years being right about people and was, today, most right of all. He had worn his best agbada, cream and gold, enormous and magnificent, because he had decided that if his daughter was getting married in Seoul under a cherry blossom tree, he was going to be fully, completely, gloriously himself in it. Adayeze Okafor wept quietly and without apology from the moment the ceremony began. She had a folded handkerchief that she had brought specifically for this purpose, and she used it without self-consciousness, because she was a woman who had decided decades ago that the things worth feeling were worth feeling completely. Chidi stood very straight with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and his eyes suspiciously bright. When his mother passed him her second handkerchief, he took it without comment and did not use it, and then, 40 seconds later, used it. Sunhi sat in the front row in a pale ivory hanbok with a silver brooch at the collar, ivory for the occasion, her private acknowledgement that today was a day that marked a beginning rather than just a continuation. She held her tea. She did not weep. So she was still, the specific stillness of a woman who has completed something she devoted years to and is simply, fully present in the reality of its completion. She looked at her son under the cherry blossom tree and thought about a boy who had always been too careful, too closed, too frightened underneath the authority that he would never have called fear. She thought about what it had cost him to kneel in a garden. And she thought, as she always thought when something important became real, that patience was not the same as passivity, that waiting for the right thing was not the same as doing nothing. Jae-hyun stood under the cherry blossom tree in a charcoal suit that he had chosen himself, his left arm at his side, the dragon tattoo visible at the cuff because Zuri had told him 3 days before the wedding, directly, without ceremony, the way she said all the things that mattered most. Wear it. All of it. You don't have to hide any part of yourself today. He had looked at her when she said it and understood that she was not just talking about the tattoo. She was talking about everything he had kept covered and controlled for 20 years. She was telling him he could put it down, that she could hold it, all of it, and not be crushed. So he didn't hide. When Zuri came through the garden door, she was wearing ivory, a fitted architectural dress that was entirely her, aimed strong and beautiful and designed for a woman who moves through the world on her own terms. Her natural hair was crowned with small white flowers that her mother had arranged that morning with the focused care of a woman performing an act of devotion. She carried nothing, no bouquet, no prop, just herself, walking toward the man she had chosen in a garden in winter when the tree was bare, and was choosing again now with the blossoms finally open and the whole world, it felt like, watching. She stopped beside him. He looked at her and said nothing for a moment, which was not his usual way, but was the right way. And in that silence, the whole garden was quiet too. The petals drifting, the light spring air moving through the blossom branches, the 52 people who loved these two people in various ways and degrees holding their breath without knowing they were doing it. Then he said very quietly, eyeing so that only she could hear, "You are the most extraordinary thing that has ever happened to me." She said, equally quietly, "I know, try to keep up." The officiant, who had been warned by both of them separately that they wanted something short and true and free of sentiment that didn't earn itself, kept it exactly that. They said their vows looking at each other, not at notes. The vows were simple, no poetry borrowed from other people's moments. Just two people saying, plainly and fully, what they were choosing and why. Jae-hyun's voice was steady and low, and did not perform the emotion but carried it completely. Zuri's voice was clear from the first word to the last. The same voice that had said clear over a defibrillator, that had said fight into the dark of an operating room, that had said, I might marry Jae-hyun in a winter garden with the blossoms not yet come. The same voice choosing out loud one more time, for the first time. Yeah, and when it was finished, and when the simple gold band joined the ring he had placed on her finger in the morning light 6 weeks before, the gathered people applauded. Emmanuel Okafor said something in Igbo that Chidi would later translate as approximately, "This is the son I didn't know I was waiting to have," which made Adai's cry harder. Chidi uncrossed his arms for the first time and put them around his sister and said into her hair quietly, "You did good, Zuri. You actually did good." And she laughed and held him back. Sunhi set down her tea and allowed herself, at last, the full version of the smile she had been keeping private for months. The one that was not strategy or management or calculation. Just a mother. Just joy. A petal from the cherry blossom tree drifted down and landed on Zuri's shoulder. Jae-hyun reached up and brushed it away, his tattooed fingers gentle against the ivory fabric, and she turned to look at him. And they were, for one moment, entirely alone inside the ceremony of everything they had survived to arrive here. All of it. The rain and the surgery and the flatline and the slap and the whisper and the Busan file and the kidnapping and Minji in the corridor and her father's 14-hour flight and the cherry blossom tree that had waited bare through the whole winter and bloomed finally at the right time. He kissed her. She kissed him back. The tree bloomed above them, and in Seoul, in a garden, or in the light of a spring morning that had taken a rain-soaked night and 9 hours of surgery and 7 seconds of flatline and a secret kept across 7 years and a family that flew across the ocean and a woman who refused every single time to be bought or broken or bargained with. In all of that, on the other side of all of that, something very simple had become real. They were married. They were home. This is the end of part 2. And the beginning of everything else. Dine, if this story lived in your chest the way it lived in mine, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit subscribe, because there is more story where this came from and you do not want to miss it. Second, share this video with someone who needed to see 2 people earn their happy ending. Someone who needs to believe that the most complicated love stories are sometimes the most worth having. Third, leave me a comment. Tell me your favorite moment from this whole story, marked across both parts. The whisper in the rain, the slap, the Busan reveal, the cherry blossom proposal, the father's dinner, Chidi and his handkerchief, the wedding, the kiss under the tree. Tell me, I read every single one. Jae-hyun and Zuri. From a nameless hospital in the rain to a garden in full bloom. They made it.